I would have never known we would have gotten to this point to have a collection that's probably important, without being able to write a $50,000 check or $1 million check. But Mark, if it burned tonight, that would be very sad. I'd be heartbroken. But it's not about the stuff. It's about the people that we've met along the way. We have the best friendships and relationships with artists and gallery people and museum people, and that's what lasts. So I'm taking very good care of my things, but that I'm not going to allow my possessions to possess me.
So I have Tim Newton here today. He wasn't expecting to be on a podcast. I wasn't expecting him to be on a podcast.
Absolutely.
But I'm thrilled you are.
Thank you. Likewise, I think.
We had talked. Yeah, you think? That's right. Yeah, we'll find out. We're going to find out. Yeah, you had talked to me. We had talked actually about maybe almost 6 or 8 months ago about doing one.
Yes.
And you don't live here, so the fact that you just happened to be in,
worked out very well.
Tim texted me, and you texted me what? What was your text?
I texted you and said, "Hey, Mark, I'm in town, and if you're around, I'd stop by." And you replied, "Have you got an hour for a podcast?" So I'm like, well, just get right to the point.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
I said, "You are hilarious."
Didn't say hi or, "Oh, nice to hear you." No.
Glad you're here.
I want content. Well, I want you on because you've done a lot of interesting things. You've got, you're a photographer. You've run important art clubs. You now are running the magazine. You're the editor? Publisher. Okay. Got to get that right. Anyway, and so that's a long career in art. And I want to kind of find out how all that happened. I mean, we've talked at shows. I've been to the Salmagundi Club before in New York, all this, but we really haven't talked.
Right.
And that's what a podcast allows me to do. So my curt answer is, yeah, can you do a podcast? Really is my way of saying, I'd like to talk in depth to you for about an hour and kind of get to know you.
Well, it's a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Where'd you grow up?
The West. I was born in Longmont, Colorado.
Oh, wow.
And then lived in Torrington, Wyoming, and very southeast Wyoming, Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and then back to Longmont.
So when you grew up in Longmont, that's where you're born?
Yeah.
And so you went to grade school, junior high, high school, that kind of stuff?
I did those things.
All those things in the same place?
No, it was Longmont, and then grade school in Torrington, Wyoming, and in the 5th grade moved to Scottsbluff, and was in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, very southwest, until the middle of the 9th grade, then back to Longmont.
And so what was taking you on this circuitous route of the West?
My parents.
And what were they doing that they had to move? So these are small towns, right?
My dad was a minister.
Ah, okay.
And so he went from one church to the other, pretty much. Yeah.
I see. And
non-denominational Christian church.
And so you went where he went, or where the calling was.
Yes.
Right.
And that actually made it difficult for me. I always felt somewhat disconnected. I was often the new kid in town. There were a couple other moves in there, small within Colorado, but I feel like I had an uneasy childhood, and I realized in later years that probably prepared me to be adaptable and meeting people and able.
Yeah, you're not only the new kid, but you're the new kid preacher's son.
That's true. Yeah, PK.
Yeah, is that what they call it?
Yeah, preacher's kid.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
Yeah, I would think it is, right?
Yeah.
And how is that? What is it being? So I've actually had a couple artists I think who are preacher's kids. What's the problems with that? What do they do?
Well, it's probably an expectation that you might feel from other kids, like in some way you're held to a higher standard than normalcy. Mm-hmm. But I didn't feel so much any real issue for me with being PK, although it may have been, but it was more just the newness that, but I feel, in retrospect, that really prepared me for a lot of adult adventures to be able to step in and meet people and adapt quickly.
Makes you a chameleon to some extent.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are little towns too, right?
Yes.
Which is even, I think, would be more difficult having grown up in a pretty small town.
Everybody knows everything that anybody's doing or not. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and like, who are you and how do you fit in and can you play sports?
Right.
And could you play sports?
I did just very minimally, and when I was in, I guess it was junior high, I was diagnosed with a bone issue, juvenile epiphysitis, I think, if I can remember that far back. And so that eliminated me from, I was supposed to take it easy because my bones grew faster than they were softer than they should have been or something. But
Yeah.
it all turned out well in the end. You know, I missed out on sports because I really like sports. So now as an adult, when I've done some sport things, I've been very good at it, kind of natural in a lot of ways. But that was not part of my youth.
And were you doing art at that time when you were a kid? Were you drawing, painting, photography, or anything?
That's the only time I did art was when I was a youngster. So when I was 8 years old in Torrington, I won first place in the newspaper art contest. I did a drawing of Peter Pan.
Uh-huh.
It was printed on the front page. I do not have that paper, to my dismay, but I won a Zebco fishing reel, rod and
Do
reel.
you know how I knew that was going to be a fishing reel? Just by Zebco.
For sure. So I had, I always, the little matchbook covers that, like, you can go to this art school in Chicago or all of those things, draw this if you can draw this Santa Claus head, and I did all that. And I did watercolor in art class in a senior high, and that was it. I really have not, with one exception, not done much since.
So why didn't you go into art? I mean, you won that contest, and you were 8 years old, like fourth grade, maybe third grade.
Yeah, third, I think.
Yeah. And so you knew you were good at this field, and you kept doing it all the way through junior high and high school.
Well, I wouldn't say kept doing it, but I always enjoyed it. And it appealed to me.
Yeah.
It did. So that my mother was very artistic, and I give her credit for a lot of my, ability, if you will. So, but I've gotten so busy with so many other adult things that I don't have that time.
But did you at that time, when you're graduating high school, go, maybe I should go into art, be an artist?
Not that late. It was earlier that I thought I would be an artist. But by the time I was, a senior in high school, that was out of my mind.
And was that because of parental going, that's not really even an
No,
option?
no, it was just not in my mind. I actually thought I would go into radio broadcasting.
Yeah, you have the voice, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
And so what year did you graduate high school?
1970.
1970. And did you have brothers and sisters as well?
2 older sisters, wonderful sisters, still do.
Yep. So 1970, Vietnam War is
Yeah.
still going on. Draft, they started pulling for the lottery in 69, so you got to get pulled for...
I was, because of my back problem, I think it was 1Y or some designation that essentially exempted me. I would have been a very late draft pick.
Yes. Okay. Did you get a number? Did you draw a number as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your number? Do you remember?
It was like 320.
Oh, yeah. So you were
I was
okay
very
anyway.
safe.
You were going to be safe.
Yeah.
And what was your feelings on that war at that time? Because you're in a small area. Your father's a preacher.
Yeah. It was a painful thing, but I wasn't engaged enough to really be, a strong opinion. I just knew we wanted out of there. That's really, it was bad from the beginning, and it only got worse. It was ill-fated.
And you probably knew kids that went over there.
I did.
And some probably didn't come back.
I did.
Yeah. And were you at that point growing your hair out and doing that?
My hair was long, not that long.
Your dad probably wouldn't allow it.
Probably.
Well, it's hard, too, in a smaller community, in a Western community. I know I grew up in a Western community, too.
Yeah.
And my hair was long, not,
Yeah.
Well, it was long.
Yeah. I'm letting it grow long now.
It wasn't the longest in the school,
No.
but it was there for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so you graduate in 1970, and what do you do from there?
So I stayed out of school. I was going to college, so I just determined to go to radio broadcasting school. Mm-hmm. I applied to
Was that because of your voice? I mean, you do have this beautiful voice.
It must have been. I must have been told.
Yeah.
It appealed to me. I did some journalism in high school and was copy editor of the paper, and wrote some articles. There was an article that I wrote. It was a kind of play on words, but I'm a cynic, and I wrote a critical commentary about various things within the school and poked fun at the administrators, and it was pretty good. I've got those articles.
Well,
I should pull them out.
Kept.
Those I got. So I applied to a radio broadcasting school in San Francisco and was accepted. And
Did they
But
have
then,
an interview, like a voice interview or anything like that? Or
yeah, they did. Yeah, so that's probably all it took.
yeah.
But in any case, but then a school that my father had gone to in Manhattan, Kansas, was at the time called Manhattan Bible College. It's since changed to Manhattan Christian College. They had a radio. They had a radio station and a program for broadcasting. And so I went out there and interviewed with them, and decided I'd go to get my broadcasting degree from Manhattan Christian College.
Versus San Francisco.
Versus San Francisco. Boy, that changed my life.
Yeah.
So but I stayed out of school until January, and so I graduated in May, and in May of 1970, I had a connection in Denver with the city and county of Denver, and I became an animal control warden for the city and county of Denver, otherwise known as dog catcher.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge animal lover. I mean, beyond huge. And so it was a great job, and there were great people that worked within that department. And we rescued a lot of dogs and animals had been hit in the streets and all kinds of stuff. The dog catcher is certainly, there's a real stigma around that title, but the truth is it's the opposite. And so
you're a PKDC.
And so I stayed on that until December, went to school in January in Kansas, came back to that job in the summertime because it was a really good job. And so but I ended up in Kansas, and I ended up getting a degree in Bible ministry. So I actually am an ordained minister. Few people know that. Until this
a lot of
podcast.
people more do.
Yeah.
And you're still
Does anybody listen to these podcasts?
No, not really.
Okay, good.
Is this? Are you still an ordained minister?
I am. You don't lose that.
Oh,
Yes.
Okay. It's like being a physician. You're still a physician.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, what flipped you from being a broadcaster to going and becoming a minister? Was it just you saw that as your role with your father?
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't a lot. There was not probably a lot of parental influence. Actually, sadly, my dad died when I was 20. He was in the middle of my college years, and he died at 57. It was very sad, but a great guy. But I just got caught up in the ministry, and I'm still a strong believer, Christian, and so I studied. I had pastorate in Havensville, Kansas, when I was in college, and also I was youth minister in Belleville, Kansas. So that's kind of the tradition in those small colleges. You go out to the outlying communities and do your thing. So it's kind of an apprenticeship, if you will. So that was great. And in the end, so my wife, who was also from Longmont, Colorado, but we never knew each other in Longmont.
And when did you guys get married? How old were you?
We were in college. It was 5 days before I was 21. 1973.
Yeah.
We're still married.
Yeah. Good for you.
God bless her.
Yeah.
And so she went on I'm jumping on ahead, but she went on an internship to New York City and worked with a church on Staten Island in the summer of 72. Before we were married, we were engaged, and then we got married in January of 73. But she came back from that internship and said, well, let's go to New York when we get out of school. We should go to, we should go next summer. And, and I'm like, I am not interested in going to New York. As far as I never want to go to New York as long as I live.
Yeah.
So we went to New York.
Yeah. But she liked it.
Yeah, she did. And so we went. And, that was
and what were you going to do? Yeah, what were you going to do? I mean, you're a minister.
To work in a church. So, and so we went and helped started a church on Long Island. And that we went there in the summer of 73 as kind of interns. And then after graduation, after she graduated from K-State and Manhattan Christian are right across the street from each other and have joint programs. So we went there in 76. And for about a year and a half, I worked with the church. And so that was... But then determined that full-time ministry was not for me. But we did not leave. So, well, that's a whole other thing. Being when it's a profession. People expect you. So now for me as a Christian, I can just be Tim Newton and I believe hopefully have an impact on people's lives as I, share grace and mercy and the love of God with people. And people don't look at me and say, well, you're paid to do that. I just get to be me and low key, I'd like to say I'm not a pushy person, and most people would probably agree. But, so but I stayed in New York. In the end, a fella in the church owned a kitchen remodeling business and asked me to work with him in his kitchen business. So that was the rest of my life until much later.
So are you in Long Island?
Long Island, east of New York City, about 50 miles east of Manhattan.
So it's still kind of a small area, right?
No.
It is not. Long Island is still
many millions of people.
Yeah.
And it's just one,
it's not
one city
Manhattan.
to the next.
Yeah.
It's not Manhattan. It's a different breed of population.
Yeah. And so
for sure.
He says, work with me in my kitchen business. You're building out kitchens, contractor for just specializing in that?
Yeah, home residential remodeling. And so I worked for him for 10 years and then started my own company. Yeah, he moved to Florida, and I started my own company and had a great partner who worked with me. We did it together. And so that was probably 40-some years in the kitchen business. And I sold my half of the business to him a year ago. So it's just, so that was at the end of 2018. He took the business, and I thought I retired.
So even when you were doing the Salmagundi Club, you had your own
full time. I had my own company.
Yes.
So yeah, I was at Salmagundi. I probably it helps us talk about when I got involved in art. And so in 1991, I bought my first piece of art. And
so 20 years, basically, you've been working in the kitchen business, more or less, 18 or so.
Yeah.
And then in 1991, what happened?
It's really a good story. It's been told probably too many times, but it is
I've never heard
really
it.
good. So my best friend from high school, Dennis and Debbie Stoner from Longmont, they ended up being custom builders in Big Sky, Montana. And we'd always stayed close. And in 91, September of 91, I went out to visit them. Just me, Kathy, and the kids stayed in New York. So I went to see them. And before I went, we were on the phone about a week before. And Dennis said, so, we're going to go down to Yellowstone. And he said, but before we do, we're on the way down, we're going to stop and see Gary Carter. He said, you know Gary Carter? I said, yeah, he's a catcher for the New York Mets. No, not that, Gary Carter. And so Gary Carter, cowboy artist.
Right, so
and they had bought a pretty good-sized study from him, a pencil study that was lovely, but his signature had been obscured by the mat, and so he said, I'll take it back to the house and sign it where you can see it. And they said, well, we'll just come and pick it up. But on that phone call, when Dennis told me we were going to stop at this artist studio, I knew. I just knew that was the beginning of the rest of my life. It was a really odd feeling, but it's as real as me looking at you right now. And
you're about early 40s?
Yeah, so it was so I'm 68.
Yeah.
Minus 30. I don't like do math. I did enough of that in the kitchen business. So
we'll just call it early 40s.
like that.
Yeah.
And we'd always enjoyed art, and we'd had a few little things from here or there, but so we went to Gary's studio and pulled up. He lives on Hebgen Lake, just north of West Yellowstone, and had big teepee and out in the driveway. He's up on the hill, and the studio was filled with artifacts. It could look like your gallery here. really wonderful. The buffalo heads and all the Indian artifacts and whatnot. And went through. He had this kind of rack of drawings of his studies that he was selling, and I found a wonderful piece of two mountain men on horseback at full gallop, riding down toward the Snake River, and there's a mountain man rendezvous below with the mountain man teepees. They're right under Mount Moran, and it was a piece probably 3 feet wide and 18 inches high, unfinished. The second rider, his hand is up, but no reins in the hand.
Yeah.
And it was $650. and I bought it, and it was framed, which is, I thought I had lost my mind to spend that much money.
Yeah.
Really. And that drawing is so good, it still hangs,
Yeah.
which is astonishing. So that was the beginning of my, so in 1991, my art life, and really in earnest. His brother, Gary's brother, did a print business, and he did reproductions of Gary's paintings. We didn't have any money, but I could buy a print for $100 or $150, and started buying prints from him. And then the various print companies, Greenwich Workshop.
This is early 90s?
Early 90s. The print business was hot.
Yeah.
Somerset House, Mill Pond, Applejack, you name the press. I was getting all their catalogs, and I became real junky. And so
still have all those
still
prints?
have all those prints. You called it.
Yeah.
So I fortunately or unfortunately have two large architectural flat files, really big,
Yeah.
and I've got all those prints. But, Mark, that drove my wife crazy.
Yeah, sure.
But that was my art education.
Yeah,
I
that's
didn't know it was worth it. I've got 160 prints in those files. I mean, it's crazy. But I just started paying attention, and it exposed me to all kinds of great artists that were represented by those print companies.
Yes.
So that was that went on for a few years.
At some point, didn't you go, maybe I should get an original?
Well, what happened was in 1995, I started following Arts for the Parks, and which is gone now, of course. But we had I was subscribing to all the magazines along with the print stuff, and became familiar with Lanford Monroe, and truly one of the greats. And in 1995, we bought a painting of Lanford Monroe's from Arts for the Parks in 1995, and that was a serious acquisition for us. It was $5,000, and which was
that's a big jump up from
it was like from prints to that.
$650 for a drawing and all the prints, and now a $5,000.
Yeah, no.
How long did it take you to make that decision? Do you remember? Was it an immediate one, or
pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much immediate, because it was the way they had their sale was they opened it up to the public, the night after their big opening, which we were not at. So I bought it from an image that I'd seen in their catalog, and it's still one of the great paintings that we own, and any painting by Lanford is generally pretty remarkable. So then the next year, our friends we'd been going to Big Sky to see them. They said, well, why don't you come out instead of coming to flying into Bozeman and coming to Big Sky, why don't we just rendezvous in Jackson, because they've got this Fall Arts Festival. And so we did, and the National Museum of Wildlife Art, and I give the museum specifically great credit for a whole bunch of stuff that happened after that, but they had their Western Visions. It was a miniature show in those days. Yeah. Nothing was bigger than 10 by 12.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that was perfect for people of very modest means. And so we were exposed to great artists, great art that was all almost affordable. Yeah. So, the artists in those shows at that day it was so careful. And I didn't realize, I just, was fortunate that they did such a job of curation that almost anything that I would have bought would have been good. And, it was Clyde Aspavig and Bill H.F. and Sherry McGaw and Chris Blossom.
Were you buying some of those artists?
Yes, so we started. We started immediately.
That's really good.
$1,300 for a fabulous Michael Stack, and the third year in 1998, Clyde Aspavig won the Artist Choice Award for Best in Show, the Red Smith Award, and that was for a little 10 by 12 Goats in Norway. It is a knockout painting by Clyde, and they drew our name. I didn't know who Clyde was, but it was a great painting. I mean, I think about that, not knowing who Clyde is, Yeah, well. But that's how you start, and it was very fortuitous, and Clyde's wife, Carol Guzman, a fabulous lady, came over to us when, the crowd kind of like, okay, and they draw the names like, who's that? Because in the Jackson crowd, we were not a fit in the Jackson crowd. We could hardly. So to the point that year in 98, when they drew us for that, they also drew us for, 3 others, which was unheard of. and I had to decline that, and it was like, people didn't do that either because
Right.
with the deep pockets there. So, it's who we were. And Carol came over and she said, "Oh, do you know Clyde?" And no, we don't know. And so she, at the end of the show, she brought Clyde over and found out that they were living in Loveland at the time. They had just broken ground on their place in Clyde Park up in Montana. And they said, "Okay, next year in '99, when you come back, come and stay with us for a day." I mean, they were so gracious completely. And so the next year, went up to Clyde Park and ended up buying a fabulous landscape from him there. And it just really started things rolling. It was, every year we were going then to Jackson to the miniature show and on. And
And you were primarily buying wildlife pieces at
No.
that time? Or
no,
were-
never been,
I say that because, they're known for that at
that
show.
is the name of their museum.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the goats were Norwegian goats and probably don't qualify as wildlife in the truest sense. But, probably the majority of what we were buying was landscape, what kind of Western landscape. So
Do you think that part of it was because you're living in New York and you're really a Western boy?
that's exactly right. There's no doubt about it. That's
I would think so.
well determined because it was just represent home to me.
Yeah.
I was
And your wife, too.
my heart, the both of us. So my heart has always been in the West, always. But so the show was really wonderful. Somebody asked me, I was in downtown, down in Jackson, and someone introduced me, and they said, "Oh, are you an artist?" And this was probably 1999. And I said, No. And they said, "Oh, so you're a collector?" And I said, "No, I'm not a collector." And, well, who do you have in your collection? Lanford Monroe, Clyde Asfabig, Bill H.F., a couple others at that point. And they said, "You're a collector." But I didn't regard myself. I thought collectors were people with money.
Yeah, you saw it as a different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. And at that point, did you think maybe I am a collector?
I would have liked to have felt that. It's like that's a thing, but I really reserved that for people with money. We really were very, very modest of budget. So
And now that's not a true fact.
that is not a true fact.
You can be an amazing collector and have
Yeah.
very little money.
It's true.
It's not the value of the paintings that make the difference. It's the spirit and the enthusiasm of wanting to have and be a part of the
Amen.
artist
That's right.
world and the paintings.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's about 98 that you realize I am
Yeah.
a collector.
A little bit.
I'm spending all my free time going to buy art
Yeah.
at art shows.
And all my free money,
Yeah.
what limited there was, that was it. It went to that.
Yeah.
It was not having a bank account. It was having art on the wall.
And so how did that evolve from 98 on? At some point, you even got more involved. correct?
Yeah, and because I had my kitchen business, I had a little more disposable income as time went on into the, up until 2008, and bought probably pretty voraciously. And I think that
And were they always at shows like this, or did you buy from galleries as well?
galleries as well. Yeah, I bought a piece from you really early, probably in the late 90s, maybe. A very unusual Frank Tenney Johnson piece.
Oh, yeah, I remember that collection.
Yeah,
One of those
it
little
was,
small ones.
It was two greyhounds running out of a design. They were actually exiting the design that he did as a teenager. It's a spectacular. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you got it. I wish I had another one to sell you.
Yeah. And so, it got pretty hot and heavy probably. Mostly small paintings, moderately. A lot of paintings that we bought over time, and sculpture. We enjoy sculpture as well. And so, the collection grew nicely, and I had the luck of the draw at many shows. So I'd come to a show and be able to cherry pick and be lucky enough for the draw, so that the collection. Someone said to me recently, they said, you don't have a bad painting in your collection. And I credit the Wildlife Museum for that, and the print, the time studying prints and all, but just well curated shows make a real difference for a collector.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. And if you go to a gallery where they spend a lot of effort, not just grabbing anybody that will sell, but curate.
And I should have said that way too, because well-curated galleries fall right there. I mean, I've bought a lot of work from galleries.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
I spend a lot of effort making sure the people that are in my gallery personally are ones that I put in my own home.
Absolutely
and that's kind
right.
of the curation. If it doesn't go in my house, then why would I sell it to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more than a money thing for me. It's
Absolutely.
Quality and also I'm living around it, right? I'm living around these every day.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I've never bought for investment.
Yeah.
I've never bought because somebody might have said, oh, this is going to be, that's just never interested me. I mean, I buy smart, but it doesn't have to be big bucks and all. So I've just been very fortunate, very, very fortunate along the way.
And so at what point did you go, I need to get more serious even about what I'm doing now? Because you're doing your business, you're collecting, you're spending all your money, your time. But at some point you become involved with the Salmagundi Club too, right?
Yep. Salmagundi.
Salmagundi.
It's tough. You know, it's a tough word to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Salmagundi.
That's right.
All I know is Maynard Dixon was a proud member.
Yeah, we were proud to have him as a member.
He was actually used it as his address when he was out in different places. When he was in New York, he would actually, I got a letter where he says, use the Salmagundi
47
Club.
Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
Well, it's another part of a great story, and that is because of the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson and the show and the Fall Arts Festival. In 2002, Kathy and I were returning from Jackson. We flew on American to Dallas, moved over to the LaGuardia Gate, and we're sitting in the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, and 15 feet away facing me is a fellow sitting in the chair waiting for the flight to be called. And I look at him, and he opens up a catalog from Arts for the Parks. And so I went over and said, well, you must have been in Jackson. Now here you are at the LaGuardia Gate, and we're going the same way. And, we don't know anybody in New York that, we knew nothing about the New York art world. We never engaged except for a couple of shows that Lanford Monroe had at King Gallery, or it was Fred King at another gallery. But in any case, that's all our connection was there in the museums. But we got on the flight, and I went back and sat by him. And his name is Del Bach. He's a fine artist, and now lives in Connecticut. But he, on that flight, then said, well, have you ever been to the Salmagundi Club? Well, I said, well, what the heck is that? What, Salma who? And so he said, well, next month we have our fall auctions, and I'd like to invite you to come and, come to dinner and the auction. And so I said, wonderful. And in October of 2002, Kathy and I went and walked in the front door of this grand mansion. It's the last brownstone mansion on Fifth Avenue, south of 124th Street, about 5 miles going north. And just fell in love because, I, in the interim, had read some of the history of Salmagundi, knew its position in the art world. And
what was it, by the way?
So... What was
his position in the art world?
So,
for people who don't know.
Yes, thanks. Salmagundi was begun in 1871 by 5 guys. 3 were artists, 2 were art lovers, like myself. I think about it that way. And they started an association that was essentially a social gathering where they would sketch. It was originally called the Sketch Club, and then became... They took the name Salmagundi on in, it's probably 1878 or 9, after they began in 1871. Salmagundi was a word used by Washington Irving. It was a series of essays. It was the title of an accumulated series of essays called the Salmagundi Papers. And it was just a potpourri of many things. And they saw themselves that way, that they were amalgamation of different attitudes and art styles. And so they became Salmagundi. But in 1871, they began meeting in artist studios. And so we have some images of them early on around New York City, always in Greenwich Village, never north of 23rd Street. They were always down in the Village. And in that day, New York was a hotbed for illustrators. I mean, they were artists and illustrators just filled the Village, and there were all kinds of art organizations and art associations. So, in any case, they they began the club, and it grew, and it became a very prestigious organization to be a part of. In 1897, we rented a building on West 12th Street, just a half a block west of Fifth Avenue, right where we are now. And for 20 years, we're in a grand house there. And all the while, they were looking for a place of their own to buy. And in 1917, we were able to buy, I wasn't there, I say we, but understand, buy the building that we're in. And so it's a brownstone mansion between 11th and 12th Street on the east side of the road, just south of Union Square and just north of Washington Square Park.
And before that, they just rented.
They just rented.
And then they found their home.
That's right. And so when they found that building, they immediately, that same year in 1917, built a large gallery in the backyard of the house. So the house had a garden, and they built 2 levels there. And at the garden level, they put in essentially a game room that had 5 10-foot pool tables. So you can see their priorities.
Yeah.
They wanted to play.
On one of those pool tables.
And so they had that room there, and the floor above it then was the gallery. And they put in a large gallery with a beautiful skylight, and that was their exhibition space. It was always about exhibiting. They had exhibits continually, and you can read reviews of their exhibits in the New York Times. So these artists were the premier artists, and many of them artists of the American West. It's a topic that I love. Actually, I'm doing a talk at Prix de West this June about Salmagundi and its influence on the art and the artists of the American West. And just to name a few, starting with, some of the greats, obviously Maynard Dixon was a member, Carl Rungus, every one of the Taos Society of Artists, every one of the Taos founders were Salmagundians. In fact, when we bought our building in 1917, 4 of those artists, Sharp, Kaus, Blumenschein, and I can't forget the 4th. I mean, I'm not. Maybe it wasn't Blumenschein, but Kaus and Sharp and 2 other of the Taos founders donated paintings to help pay for the building, which we bought for $75,000 in 1917. It's worth about $60 million today.
60?
60. Wow. $60 million. There's no artist organization in the world that I'm aware of that has its equal. So we're really, really very fortunate, very blessed. And, along the way, it's not always been easy to keep the building because it's
even
an artist group.
1917, I mean, we just went into World War I as America.
That's right.
Which is not a prime time to be. Maybe it's a good time to buy because things were probably crashing. But
that could have been, yes.
A very difficult time in America right there. And the next year we have the pandemic flu that kills, 30 to 50 million people.
Yeah, insane.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate to be able to buy it and to have it. And those are back to the artists of the West. So it's Rungus, it's Frank Tenney Johnson, it's all of the Taos people. It's Thomas Moran. Thomas Moran in 1871 went to Yellowstone on the Hayden expedition, drew his drawings, painted his watercolors, and between him and Jackson, the photographer, helped to persuade Congress to establish the first national park, Yellowstone. Little did he know that also that same year that Salmagundi had been formed and that he would soon become the 4th president of the Salmagundi Club. So Moran is a great, we just, the list is terrific.
Is Russell one of the members too?
Russell, we had 3, in my mind, 3 major exceptions to my statement about how everybody who was anybody was there. Russell was not, Remington was not, and Bierstadt was not.
Yeah, of course.
So,
Remington died in 1909, and
right.
so you didn't get the building to 17. So
yes,
maybe if he had had a building and alive, he might have done it.
Maybe so.
And so, how did being a member influence their art or the Western art? Just being able to spend time in the building and talk to your peers?
Well, that's it. I think that the talk that they had with their peers resulted in their travel here. travel to the West. So you think about what artists talk about when they're together, other than their techniques and comparing, they talk about great places to paint. That's a frequent discussion among the artist group. And
Well,
so
they would have loved Dixon in that group because everyone you just named was from the East. Only Dixon was born in the West.
That's right. I think he was about the singular fellow
Moran
born in the West. Yeah. And so when he's in the room and they're playing pool and leaning on the bar, and they're talking about, the West, whether it's Utah or Arizona or California, and you get the so in in the Taos group, you had Sharp was the first one to Taos in 1893, and he's telling Phillips and Blumenschein to come.
Right.
When I read the account that Blumenschein wrote about arriving in the Taos Valley, I can't help but have tears come down my face. It's so glorious to hear his description of what Sharp had told him. He said there was no way that a person could actually tell you how good this is. So I think that happened around the pool tables at the club. And so every spring they would have what they called the getaway dinner. And at the getaway dinner, that was before they all dispersed. And, I'm sure they talked about methods of travel, the Santa Fe Railway or, the Burlington Northern or whatever it would have been applicable. And it was a social club where they also exhibited their work and they had lifelong friendships.
Was most of this work at this period of time kind of traditional Western or just traditional paintings versus modern art?
Yes, definitely traditional, and it was not necessarily just traditional Western. Although my greatest interest, is in focusing on these Western painters. But it was George Ennis Jr. The list is long of academic painters that were there that didn't paint any Western scenes. So they were just interspersed with each other in the shows and. People we have the records of the exhibitions are recorded. Alex Catlin is a terrific historian at the Salmagundi. He's not an employee, but no one's really an employee. I was just a volunteer in my time there. But in any case, he's got a book called it's the exhibition records, and we see in those records that, for instance, Frank Tenney Johnson exhibited for about 30 years straight. Every year, Frank Tenney, the names of the paintings, the prices of the paintings.
They must have sold, otherwise he wouldn't have done it.
So, yeah. Thomas Moran, the same thing. We see his watercolors in there for $25. And it's a terrific exhibition record. And to see the names of these Western, specifically for me, those Western painters, is great fun.
What about Robert Henry? Was he a member, do you know? Or George Lucas?
I don't remember if he was. I don't know.
I'm just wondering if any of those Ashcan artists were also members.
Some of them probably were, but without the records in front of me, I can't get there.
And how about, did the modern art ever infuse the Salmagundi Club at all? Did they ever have any modern art, or do they at this point?
Pretty much not. It's kind of been a bastion of traditionalism, and people ask me. So in the end, I became very involved at Salmagundi, and people ask me about having modern art there. How come you don't have modern art? And my response, has been, well, New York is filled with modern art, and that's fine. I'm not going to go there, but, don't be critical of us because we're more traditional, because it's kind of a last bastion of traditional representational art in some way.
So it always was that from the beginning?
Always.
It just kind of morphed into, this is what we like, this is what we do, and these are the people that gravitated to it. So it really never changed from that, and still is, right?
That's true. And there's probably some legitimate criticism, perhaps, that could be, voiced in that direction. But I love traditional representational art that is true beauty, and I don't have to have a paragraph to explain to me why I should like it.
And is it mainly made up of artists?
Yes. So the club our bylaws say that it will be, a majority of artists, maybe. I don't remember the percentage right now, but it's artist run. They're on the board. It has to be, a percentage of artists greater than non-artists. But we've always had, and very successfully artist patrons, non-artist collectors like myself who have been at the club. And that every organization, I think, needs that.
And you still have a show there every year, right?
Every year. Well, there's shows all the time. So we have multiple gallery spaces. We have the main gallery and the lower gallery where the pool tables are. We use the parlor as a gallery. We use the library sometimes as a gallery, and there's a beautiful gallery at the front of the building called the Patrons Gallery. It's a beautiful place for boutique shows, and I do the show that I do, American Masters, which I'm doing again this October.
And so you're still a part of that program?
I am. So I am.
What's your title, or do you have one?
Tim Newton.
But at one point, you had a title there, didn't you?
So, well, in 2002, I came and applied for membership that night, that October, and standing in the bar, I can remember it well. It was great. I was so taken by the club. It was overwhelmingly wonderful.
Yeah,
so I applied for a membership and was voted in, and so in 2003 became a member. And I was there for the next few years, and became a little frustrated with the fact that a lot of the shows that we would have, and they were typically member shows, they were not equal to the shows that I was going to all the time in the West. So whether I attended a show at your gallery or I went to the Prix de West in Oklahoma City and all the big museum shows and so forth. And so I became a little frustrated with, not seeing some of that great quality. I don't expect all art to be equal. That's obvious. It's fair. But in the end, I was going to quit because it was not where it should have been, and nowhere near the standards of the old days of these greats that we're talking about from the 1900s. And so in the end, I went to Richard Pionk was the then president, and I asked him and the chairman, would you allow me to do a show that would be a fundraising show for the benefit of the club, but it would be an invitational show. Before I went to them, I talked to David LaFell and Sherry McGraw and Clyde Aspavig and Tucker Smith and Josh Elliott and Don Demers and Chris Blossom, and a good group of people, and said, if they let me do this, would you be in the show at the Salmagundi Club? And because of the great name of Salmagundi, they said, well, absolutely. And so I met with them, asked for permission, and they said, well, we need to think about that. I'm not sure. And I think the norm was the outsiders were not as, they just kind of become the local neighborhood art club in some way. And, some good people in the neighborhood that were Sunday afternoon painters that, they had ownership of the club. And so a week later, they said, okay, we can do it. And I give a lot of credit to Claudia Seymour. She was vice president. She was in that meeting, and she knew the names of the artists that I mentioned, but those were not known to the then president. A lot of them were not. And so she said, and she gave great encouragement. So they said, okay, you can do this show. We give you 11 days in May of 2008. And so I just I stole every good idea that I'd seen at every other show, any place. Who am I? I'm nobody. I mean, I'm a kitchen guy and an art lover, and
a collector,
and because of that training that came my way, I had a good eye, and I knew the good folks, and so that show in May of 2008. Thank God it was the spring of 2008. That saved our butts.
Because if it had been October, you would have been toast.
It would have been over. It would have never happened. And so we sold $412,000 in art.
Wow!
The first show out of the gate by a complete novice.
Right.
And they were stunned. So was I. They were stunned. It's like you can do this. You can sell art and raise money and all. And so it was a happy day. And so it was shortly after that I became chairman of the board. I mean, I wasn't, and I didn't want that actually. I was not interested in. I just want to do this, do what you do, I just spread the word, we're evangelists for beauty, and so there was never a show that good at the club because of the economy that fell away in 2008. But so we've now had 10 American Masters, and I had proposed. I said, listen, can we use the money that we make to begin fundraising for the gallery? After they had said, okay, you can do the show, then I was in the gallery, and I came to my senses. The gallery was completely dilapidated. It probably hadn't been, remodeled for 40 or 50 years. The lighting was weak. We had steam radiator pipes,
Right.
and
this is where your contracting skills actually come in.
it
nicely.
did in the end. It did. Yes, it's true. I didn't know I would be involved in it, but I proposed that, and by no means did I raise all the money to redo the gallery, but American Masters raised, I think in the end somewhere north of $350,000 over the years toward that, and we had other very generous donations that helped to pay for the $1,700,000 renovation that we did on the gallery.
Wow.
So we began that renovation in 2013. It took a long time to get the rest of the money and get going, and on April 1st of 14, we opened it up, and the glass ceiling was back. It wasn't a true skylight because in the days that they built that building, and it's a massive skylight. It's probably 30 feet by 50 feet. It's huge.
Yeah, wow.
But when that building was built, that back gallery building, we didn't have high neighbors on either side, and so the expense of a real skylight and the lack of real visible light that it would be except for a certain period during the day. So, but it's a grand gallery, and it's really transformed the club because of it's equal to any gallery space on Fifth Avenue in New York City.
Wow.
Equal to, there are more elaborate spaces at the Frick and the Met, but it's grand, and it has invisible HVAC, and it's just really a wonderful thing, and it rejuvenated the club. And American Masters and that gallery really put the club back on the map.
Is that every May?
It's now in October.
And now in October.
This coming year, we open the last week of September.
And that's
so
what
this will be year number 11.
Number 11.
Yeah.
And so if people want to attend that are listening to this podcast, what do they have to do?
So our website is AmericanMastersArt.com, and we don't have this year's artists up yet, but we have a placeholder. So if they will, go in there, see the dates, and then as we begin to finalize art and artists, then we'll post. And it's a great event in New York City. It is really, and our gala will be in early October. It's actually Columbus Day weekend this year, 2020. And so that'll be on Friday night of that weekend. And we have artists that are just about truly masters. Someone asked me early on, so, well, what is a master, and who decides who's a master?
Yeah,
and
right.
you know that question.
Yeah, I do. I understand that.
And so, in the end, there's probably a large handful of masters in that show. Over the years, we've had people such as Sherry McGraw, Richard Schmid, Ray Kinsler, Dan Green, Doug Allen, David LaFell,
John and Terry Moyers.
John and Terry Moyers, Josh Elliott. It's been a great group, a long list of fabulous people, and so it's.
And you just buy a ticket? Is that what it is to be able to go to it?
And it's a fundraiser, so the ticket's probably I think last year was $75, and it's done in the same way as the sales that you see at Prix de West or the Coors Show, where you put your name in the box. It's a set price. It's not an auction. So people, if their name is drawn, then they get to take it home.
But can they also buy it just online?
Yeah, they don't have to attend.
Can they do that on that night? If you want to buy one that night, can you buy it online, or do you have to be?
You have to put a proxy in, so you have to let us know. We'll put your name in the box,
right?
And
the 75,
and we have to know that if in fact your name is drawn, you're really going to do it because it's all on the spot.
Yeah, got it.
And so the show hangs for about 3.5 weeks.
So you do all you're still doing this. You're still involved.
Yeah.
But you sell your kitchen business, remodeling business, to your other partner in 2018.
Yes.
Thinking you're retiring and going to move to the West, right?
That's right.
So what happened?
We bought the house in Santa Fe in 2003. It's a tiny little house, but in a great spot. And so Yeah. We were done, and I was finishing my volunteering at Salmagundi in June of last year of 19, and then I got a phone call from Jared at Western Art and Architecture, and he said, we've known each other for all these years. His magazine, that he's got 3 magazines, but the Western Art and Architecture is the one I'm most familiar with. And he said, so what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I'll be in Santa Fe. I'm going to do some, gallery tours and concierge, and a little art advisory and just, small time stuff. And he said, well, why don't you come be the publisher of my magazine? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm a kitchen guy. I'm an art collector guy. And but along the way, I know most everybody in the art community, not so much in the architecture side of it, but he said, no, he really wanted me to do that. And it was a great honor because Jared is one of the finest guys out
he's
there.
A really nice man.
He is really special.
And the magazine's beautiful.
Thank you very much. It is. It's a I get comments all the time that, we're the best. And there's a lot of great magazines out there, and I'm friends with everybody in the magazine business, but it's, we have an oversized format, and it gets rave reviews. So, it took me a long time to decide. I don't even know what a publisher does, So
what does a publisher do?
Yeah, I'm figuring it out. It's, so I've been on the job, 6 months now, and, it's a lot of relationships. I do advertising sales and, lots of contacts with museums and artists and galleries. And it's really, in many ways, what I was doing already, just in terms of the daily joy of living and, picking up the phone and staying in touch with people and enjoying the art world in every way. I was in Scottsdale yesterday, and I went into the Scottsdale Museum of the West and looked at your phenomenal exhibit there, the Maynard Dixon exhibition. And I mean, it's a blockbuster show that you put together.
3 years in the making.
Unbelievable.
That would be a good one to feature in your magazine.
Imagine that. Believe me. I've already made that note.
Well, it's one of those shows that, it's 3 years in the making. We have all the, the major important paintings, Earth Noir, Shapes of Fear, plus The Study, Cloud World, all these great imagery, plus a lot more, well curated by Tricia Loescher and myself. And there's a major book that went on it too. So it is for those who are hearing this, I'm going to put out the pitch because
absolutely,
it's a very difficult to put something like that together. I don't see anything like that coming down the pipeline, probably for at least a decade or more.
Yes.
And it's open through August 2nd of 2020.
That was what I was going to ask. So the end's in August. So yeah. Good. Yeah, it's spectacular.
Yeah, so it is worth.
Absolutely. So those are the kinds of things I get to do.
Yeah, that's fun.
And it's just really
you get to do what you want to do.
Staying in touch with everyone, and it's a real joy to be in the mix.
And you're also doing your own photography, and you're in galleries. You have gallery representation, right?
Well, now I do. I've been an amateur photographer for a long, long time, and I post things on Facebook, and I get lots of comments. And so Jane Bellmeyer out of a Loom Gallery in St. George, Utah, asked me if I would have an exhibition of my photos. It fairly took me off guard, and because I'm kind
a kitchen guy.
I'm a kitchen guy. What do I know? But I do credit my life in the art world for giving me how to design a photo, how to frame a photo. I mean, after 30 years of looking at hundreds of thousands of images, I can frame a good design. It's
instinctually you can do it.
Yeah, it's just point and shoot for me.
Yeah.
But I realize it's like you talk to an artist that's been painting for 40 years, and like he does that in an hour. And so how do you know how to do that? Well, it makes it look easy, but I guess it's just all that history.
And what kind of subject matter do you like, and what kind of subject matter is going to be in the show?
It's a pretty diverse subject matter. Thank you. I've got some great New York City scenes, nice. A couple of iconic Brooklyn Bridge pictures that are, that's tough to do, to have a successful Brooklyn Bridge picture that hasn't been done before. And so I might actually have 2 of those. Some great East River scenes. So I've got my New York life. From we've been living in Brooklyn Heights the last 10 years, before we went to Santa Fe. And so Then I've got great pictures of the West. I love pictures of roads, like you do.
Yeah.
And there's something about So I actually got a domain name the other day. I haven't done a thing with it yet, but it's myamericanroads.com.
Oh, very good.
I just thought, I'm sorry I beat you to it, Mark, but
Oh, I already have one similar, so it's okay. AmericanRoads.com, a little better.
yeah, it's better. So, and so lots of Western images. I've got one with a distant cowboy on his horse out in the hillside, and some rivers, and it's a pretty Salmagundi mix. It's a real eclectic. I'm going to exhibit on the walls in the gallery about 24 images, and there'll be 5 in this genre and 6 in this genre. So it's a real miscellany.
And when does that show air?
February 13th is the opening night.
And the gallery's name?
It's Illume Gallery
And
in
that's in
St.
St.
George,
George.
Utah.
Good.
Yeah. I'm really honored by this.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic. You should be.
I picked up images today at my printer here in Tucson.
Yeah.
So I'm real excited. I've got a variety of sizes, and there'll be the webpage is there, but it's not up yet. But I'll get those images on Illume's website, so people will be able to see what's out there.
Do you have a website yourself as well?
I don't.
Okay. Not
No.
yet. But you have myamericanroads.com.
Yeah, I have timnewton.com too.
Well, yeah, so you do have a website.
But it's not. It's a domain name. I haven't developed a
developed
website.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
can you help me with that, Mark?
I can give you advice.
Good.
I don't know if I want to help you, but
You have a few things to do yourself.
I can give you a few of the pitfalls you're going to need to
Yeah,
worry
we'll talk
about.
later.
We will. And is there anything, because we're kind of wrapping it up, believe it or not, we've already been here for over an hour. I know,
Wow.
right? I know, it's amazing. Time just flies when you're in here.
It's such fun with you, Mark.
Yeah, it's just a, it's,
Truly.
It's fun for me too. But
Thank you.
is there anything that you want to, words of wisdom maybe for other collectors? Because you really have had this interesting route of not going into the art world, not thinking you're a collector.
Yeah.
And now you're really, you're a pivotal person in this business that we do, and that's why you're on this podcast. So what would you tell people out there?
I would, there's there's no start too small. I think, when you don't have money, just buy a piece of art. Most galleries will. When I bought that little Frank Tenney Johnson piece from you, I think it was $850, and this is in the probably the mid '90s. It might have been '96 or '7. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
It was $850, and I paid you for 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark.
And we were happy to have the money.
Yeah, that's it. And I'm often in debt to galleries on a time plan, and that's how you're able to do it. And so for collectors, educate yourself by going to good places like your gallery here, and you get, most gallerists are so happy to just give information and find an artist friend who you like. Then that artist friend can also give counsel. But there's no start too small, and I would have never dreamt. We have, I don't know, 360 or 70 paintings, artworks.
Wow, that's a lot.
And
that's a real collector.
It's a problem. Yeah.
Guess what? You're a collector.
and we did it in such a modest way. And over the years, there were times where we paid more than I ever dreamt that we would pay. But I mostly have collected living artists, although there's been some good opportunities otherwise. But I'm very grateful to people like you and other galleries and other collectors that have given me counsel. And the other thing I'd say is, it's not about the stuff. I love my stuff. I got some of the best stuff. My artwork that I've collected, that Kathy and I have collected, is phenomenal. I look back now and I say, wow, I would have never known we would have gotten to this point to have a collection that's probably important, without being able to write a $50,000 check or $1 million check. And so this stuff is all very, very dear to me. But Mark, if it burned tonight, that would be very sad. I'd be heartbroken. But it's not about the stuff. It's about the people that we've met along the way. We have the best friendships and relationships with artists and gallery people and museum people, and that's what lasts. So I'm taking very good care of my things, but that I'm not going to allow my possessions to possess me.
Well, I think that's a good way to end it in a lot of ways, because we think of millennials as experiential, not interested in stuff. But sometimes to get to the experience, you have to embrace the stuff.
Yes.
The art, the pieces.
It's a passage.
You know?
Uh-huh.
And by embracing the artwork itself, it gives you the direct connection to the artist and allows you to have a lifelong experience.
Yeah, it's a conduit.
Yeah, like you have.
Thank
So,
you. Yes, it's true. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to see what's going to come next. You're a publisher. You're in charge of a wonderful museum. Do they call it a museum, Salmagundi? Is it a private club?
So it's a private club, but and I'm glad you said that. Thanks. Real quick, it's a private club, but it is a not-for-profit and is open to the public every day we're open. So it's
nice.
We have a private dining room, but it's very accessible, and we just we want to be there for people. There's always a show that's open and beautiful, and so it's open to the public. It's 47 Fifth Avenue, salmagundi.org. It's easy to find, and so now I've stepped away. I was chairman of the board for 4 terms, and didn't know I'd be chairman during the construction, but it worked out good for all of us. But
it's a beautiful building. I've been to it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I encourage people to join if they can and go see it. I've done both, and I'll go do it again next time.
Yes,
It's
and
back on my list.
Yes, you must, and we have memberships for resident and non-resident. So we have reciprocity with other clubs and organizations, and so if you're not living in New York but you want to have a place to go for private dining, and you can go in for the day, and you can go to the magnificent library where you've been, and you can just spend your time as a club member. And dues are much lower than they should be, but we've kept them that way to make it affordable for artists, and so. But yeah, it's very very open.
Tim Newton, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
We'll see you soon.
Yes, we will.
All right. Yeah, fun. Oh my gosh, I learned a lot.
Thank you, Mark.
That's what I like to do this for. Is I get to learn not only about the person. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.